February is already halfway underway, and you may have asked yourself lately, where is winter? In this week's edition of Climate Friday newsletter, we're going to talk about where we stand as far as our winter snowfall and temperatures go, and also looking beyond towards the middle to latter half of February. What can you expect for the remainder of the winter season? Thanks for tuning in on the WTOL 11 YouTube channel or WTOL 11 Plus. We are going to break down where's winter and if we will see the return of any snowy, cold, wintry weather, or if we're going to stay on this mild trajectory that we have found ourselves on. So let's jump into the graphics and break down the latest information. Of course, you can always stay tuned to the WTOL 11 weather team for the very latest. So where do we stand on winter snowfall and rainfall so far? Not surprisingly, snow is well below average. Snowfall for this winter still has yet to even reach the 10-inch mark, and that puts us well over a foot below normal. Now, believe it or not, our WTOL 11 10-day forecast features no accumulating snow for the next week to 10 days, so this winter snowfall total is likely to remain stagnant. We're not really going to add to that snowfall amount, and we are right now close to 14 inches below normal, and that deficit continues to grow. Now, winter rainfall is a little bit closer to where we should be, and due to that Thursday rainfall system adding on slowly but surely to that deficit, this is very characteristic of La Nina winters, that we get some moisture in storm systems. Oftentimes, it just comes in the form of rain as opposed to snow. So what does a typical February usually dose out? Now, I know typical has various meanings around here. In the Midwest, oftentimes we see rapid fluctuations that occur during the period of a month. February is still in the heart of the winter season. On average, we total over 10 inches of snow accumulation, and that puts February as our second snowiest month of the year. Now, January is statistically the month that we get the most snowfall, with over a foot of accumulation on average. During the month of February, our normal snowfall is just a hair over 10 inches of accumulation. So in theory, we should still be seeing some decent snowfalls. Coming up in about 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to break down the last few years and some of those late season winter storms that brought us a taste of heavy accumulation during the month of February. Our average temperature during February, that equals out to 30 degrees. Of course, there's some big changes from the beginning of the month to the latter half of the month, and that 30-degree mark, that includes both our overnight lows and also our daytime highs. So far this February, we've gotten just about nothing in terms of snowfall, and our average temperature, not surprisingly, is well above normal. So we're going to break down some of the impacts of this February warm weather, and the first of which has to do with our Lake Erie. Many of you who are into ice fishing or who travel to the lake during the winter months have likely noticed there is not much ice on the lake. We oftentimes look at these satellite images, basically photos taken from outer space, that show you the conditions on Lake Erie. This particular image was taken Wednesday, February 8th. It just so happened that we saw a little bit of sunshine and clearing in the clouds. You can see some wispy clouds over the lake, but overall, most of the central portion of Lake Erie, the deeper parts, do not have ice. I want to zoom in on the western basin, though, where it is a little more shallow, and you can still see some thin ice near the Lake Erie Islands. Of course, we did briefly get a nice cool down late January. That was just enough to cause a little bit of ice cover, but overall, our ice is just a fraction of where it should be. Typically, this time of year, Lake Erie is 60% covered in ice. In other words, over half of the entire lake has some level of ice on it. Right now, our ice cover is less than 20%, and that number is shrinking by the day. In fact, due to this mild 10-day forecast, we're going to continue to lose ice day after day after day, to the point where we might just have just about nil towards the end of the month. So how have we stacked up in terms of Lake Erie ice cover for the whole season? I've got two lines plotted here. I want to show you the normal ice cover, that's in red, and this year is shown in black. Not surprisingly, in December, we typically don't have much ice on the lake. That's because winter is just kicking off. You know, we're coming off some milder days and temperatures are often above freezing. By the latter half of December, though, we do start to inch that line back up as a little bit of ice begins to form. Now, January is when the weather changes drastically, and you'll notice an uptick in ice, and that's when we start to see a little more. Focusing on that red line again, that's our normal. We reach a peak in February and March, and then that amount gradually shrinks back down as we head into the spring season. And of course, by May and June, no ice to be seen as milder temperatures take control. So this winter, where do we stand? You may recall December was exceptionally mild, at least until Christmas time, and that's why that black line is very level for the first 3 weeks or so of December. Now, the latter half of December, remember that storm we got right leading up to the Christmas travel? That actually caused a brief spike in the amount of ice that we saw. Now, the black line actually surpassed the red line there. In other words, we had more ice than normal for just a blip of time before we lost that ice back down. January, mild weather took over and that line went back down as we lost a little bit of that ice and it melted away. We saw another brief spike that occurred end of January, start of February. We had that 4.6 inches of snow, and we also got a brief cool down, but the numbers are shrinking back down. In other words, the ice is melting once again due to those mild temperatures that we've experienced lately. Now, the entire Great Lakes as a whole, not just Lake Erie, we are normally 40% covered in ice. Of course, the shallower portions tend to ice over sooner, whereas up in Superior, due to the depth, not quite as much ice develops. This year, our entire Great Lakes ice cover is only around 15%, which is much below normal. And that is a testament to the fact that much of the Great Lakes and Midwest region has had a very mild winter, with the exception of the upper Midwest. Locations like Minnesota and Wisconsin, they've gotten hit pretty hard as far as snowfall and wintry weather goes, but we are well below that normal amount of ice cover that we experienced in February. Now, due to the mild conditions and also the strong and gusty winds, one of the issues and phenomena that we are seeing on Lake Erie is known as ice flows, and we talk about these every spring. February is a little bit too early, or at least earlier than usual, but the Coast Guard has recommended avoiding the lake. Sadly, they've already had to make some rescues on the lake due to the fact that, the ice is just so shallow. There's not really much support or sustenance to it, and unstable ice conditions will continue on Lake Erie due to the warm and windy weather. And of course, with this sustained stretch of mild conditions, it is likely that that ice is going to continue to melt away as we move forward into the month of February, including some exceptional warmth like we experienced on Thursday. Depending on when you are watching this video, temperatures in the 60s, February 9th, bringing some near record conditions. Now, we're not quite going to set records for this 10-day forecast. If you look towards Friday's record, that's 61, Saturday 71. Wow, 71 in February. Yes, it has happened before, and that one occurred back in 99. Our temperatures were in the 60s, February 12th and 13th, and of course, these are all record highs, so we might not set any records, but we will still be well above normal in the temperature department. You can always stay tuned to WTOL 11 for the latest 10-day forecast, but we are highly confident that through the middle of the month, we are going to stay above average in the temperature department, and much of the Great Lakes region is going to continue to see the melting of ice. You'll notice all the way towards eastern Ohio, towards the UP of Michigan, even Chicago. This is going to affect our Lake Michigan ice, our Lake Erie ice, and even towards Lake Ontario and Lake Superior due to those milder than normal conditions. So far this winter, we are not seeing signs of additional accumulation, at least through the middle of February. And so far, our biggest snowfall this season, still just shy of the 5-inch mark. If you're watching this newsletter on Friday, just 38 days to go until spring, even though if you step outside, it almost feels like spring, doesn't it? But the official start of the spring season happens in the middle to latter half of March, on the 20th actually, and our average high by that point is 50 degrees. So the weather that we're experiencing lately is more characteristic of what you might experience on the first day of spring. Now, just one last reminder that we can indeed see some big snows in February. In 2021, we saw that historic 14.5 inches of accumulation. That occurred over the 2-day span, the 15th through the 16th of February. You may recall getting snowed in during that storm. Also looking at last year, 2022, we saw an early February snowstorm that walloped us with over a foot of snow accumulation. Now, so far, we have yet to get that big February snowstorm, and there's not to say that we are due for one. In other words, we're not guaranteed a big February snowstorm. It was just happenstance that 2 years in a row brought us that big February snow. If we are going to get snow, you can always trust the WTOL 11 weather team, and as the rest of this winter unfolds, we'll keep you posted on the progress for our rainfall and snowfall, and you can subscribe to the Climate Friday newsletter, WTOL.com/email. I'll see you next Friday with the latest. Thanks for tuning in.